Good evening, Mayor and Council. We have tonight our Planning Director, Chris Hawkes. He's going to discuss the next 3 agenda items pertaining to the annexation, entitlement, and initial zoning of approximately 1,600 acres of state trust land. Each item is going to require a separate council vote, and 2 will require a public hearing. So it's going to get a little complicated here, but I know Chris is going to guide us through this. And as Jen's presentation just indicated, this is a key step in opening this opportunity for Peoria to provide the commercial and employment and some residential opportunities in that part of our city. So Chris, please take it away.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Darwin. And thank you, Jen, for your heartfelt remarks and your lead into tonight's presentation. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight's a really important night for us. We're talking about a project that's been in an area that's been near and dear for me for several years. Tonight is the culmination of a vision that has been in play for several years. It's been a vision that has been with the past councils and certainly the support of this council in unlocking and entitling state land, particularly along the Loop 303. This is an important area for next level economic and community development growth. You've heard from past remarks that up to 75% of our land or vacant land is state land. And so our future really is intertwined with the state land department. So it's very important that we collaborate and work together. Now, over the last 18 months, the city and state land department, we've built a very good relationship. We have a shared interest in putting the resources and attention to further these endeavors. So tonight really is the fruit of that collective effort, and that's why I'm really excited to bring this forward to you tonight. But before I go forward, I do want to recognize publicly the support and effort from key members from both the city and the state land department. From the city, I want to recognize City Manager Darwin for your support, Deputy City Manager Mike Faust as well. From my team, Lori Deaver, Cody Gleason, Brandon Forey, our traffic engineer, Michael Dines from the City Attorney's Office, and of course our beloved and outgoing Economic Development Director, Jennifer Stein. From the State Land Department, the Land Commissioner, Robin Saheed, Deputy Commissioner Jim Perry, Karen Dada, we worked very closely with her, Rhonda Buss, Mark Edelman, Alex Stedman, and the representative, Carolyn Oberholzer. She's their representative for the State Land team. So tonight, I'll try to simplify it, but as City Manager Darwin mentioned, there are 3 actions as part of this presentation. I'll cover them all 3 of them in brief. The first one is to talk about a annexation and development agreement. We call it a PATA, but really it is the precursor. It guides how we consider the annexation, development, and entitlement of the property. Then we'll talk about specifically annexation of up to 458 gross acres. You can see on the screen on your right, it's the land that's identified in red. That 450 acres is in the county. That's 26R. And then we have a procedure that's required under the state statute, and that requires us to provide what they call initial zoning or translational zoning to that 458-acre area. So the purpose tonight is to establish this for the second presentation I'll deliver later for 28R, and that is for the overall entitlement of what we're calling the North Peoria Gateway. So that includes the annexation area and the areas that are already in the city. So collectively, that's 1,621 acres, and we're going to be talking to you tonight about a what we call Planned Community District zoning or PCD zoning, but it's effectively tailored zoning that allows us to really deal with some of the boundary conditions, tailor the standards and the land uses to maximize really the benefit to the community. So for those that are more visual like me, this graphic really is a depiction of the process and how the various pieces fit together. So if we look at the far left of the graphic, general plan amendment, last month that came forward to the council, we passed a series of general plan amendments. One of those amendments was to set up a new state land special land use category. We applied it to 2 strategic areas. One was the North Peoria Gateway that we'll talk about tonight, and the other one was the 6,700 acre Peoria Innovation Core centered around Lake Pleasant Parkway and the 303. So what these amendments did importantly is they signified a commitment to bring forward a cohesive entitlement for these areas. So tonight we'll talk about the North Peoria Gateway. Just know that we're in the early stages of the Peoria Innovation Core, and that'll unfold over the next year. So tonight with 25, 26, and 27R, I'll talk about those three items first, and then as a separate presentation, as I mentioned, 28R, we'll talk about the full entitlement of the North Peoria Gateway. Okay, the annexation process is very prescriptively identified within state statute. So it identifies, all the key items and timeframes that you have to meet. Now, it's a little different with state land because there are some prerequisites. Under state statute, it does require that we get authorization from the land commissioner and also the state selection board. Now, the state selection board is comprised of the governor, the attorney general, and the treasurer, and they don't, and they meet when they have agenda items. They're not always regular meetings. We did come forward to the state selection board back in July of 2019, and we got authorization for this parcel and other parcels. So that's why I said this has been near and dear to me for several years. Phase 2, once we started to move forward on the annexation, we filed a blank petition with the county recorder. You'll recall in August, we had a public hearing with the council. It was a no-action public hearing. And then tonight, we're here to talk about the annexation and potentially adopt a final annexation ordinance. As a little bit of background, several years ago, the city identified state land parcels for annexation. So the graphic on the right, I realize it's hard to see for the public, but if the areas in blue, that's all state land, and Loop 303 is kind of centered in the middle of it. The areas in orange, those are the parcels that we targeted for annexation. 2 years ago, we annexed and entitled one of those parcels, the aptly named Parcel B, which was centered around 107th and Deer Valley. So tonight, we're talking about 458 acres centered at Loop 303 in Happy Valley, and it's identified with the black hash line around it. So as I mentioned, we received authorization from the land commissioner in 2019 and the selection board. The state land department, as you know, they're the fiduciary for the trust. They've required that all lands that are annexed come with an accompanying entitlement. So that's why we're bringing forward the annexation and the zoning tonight together. This helps elevate the value of the land to the trust, and for us, it provides development certainty. So over the last 18 months, the city has worked with state land towards an entitlement of this area. So as we look at the annexation, just a couple things to note is that the area is within what we call our planning area. And so the planning area is a boundary that coincides with our general plan that goes outside of our city limits, and it identifies areas that are within our sphere of influence, areas that would someday are likely to come into the city. So we do some advanced infrastructure and land use planning in those areas. This area particularly is currently served by water and wastewater through EPCOR, and through the entitlement, they will continue to be served with EPCOR for water and wastewater services. We will provide general governance and public safety for the area. But most importantly, the annexation brings a very strategic area into the city, and as Jen alluded to earlier, it does unlock new additional land, new additional strategic land for further economic and community development for the city. Also, it's important that, and I'll speak to this later, this land will be auctioned, it will be developed at some point. It's how do we want it to be developed, and what this provides us for is it provides us for the ability for the land to be developed within the city and under our elevated design and development standards. With the annexation, there's no state land auction plan at this time. There's no specific developer, but again, this is just bringing the area into the city for entitlement purposes. And we also found that it is consistent with the city's annexation policy, GS5, that's enumerated in the general plan. All right, I'm going to switch gears to 27R. I'm going to talk about initial zoning. And so this is quite a routine process that's identified in state statute. But what it says is that it requires the annexing jurisdiction to apply what they call initial zoning. Another word, the word that we use is translational zoning for annexed land. So state statute says that when we apply translational zoning to land, you have to allow densities and uses that are no more intense than that permitted prior to the annexation. So said in plain speak, you look at the county zoning and what's most equivalent to what the county had in place. And it also requires that we have the initial zoning in place within 6 months of the annexation event. Now, tonight we're talking about annexation. We're also bringing forward the initial zoning all together tonight. When looking at the graphic to the right, that identifies the current zoning that's in place. The county has current zoning of rural residential, or RU43. That's essentially a semi-rural zoning district, allowing for 1 acre minimum lot size. We have a district that is very similar to it called SR 43 or Suburban Ranch 43. That would be the most analogous zoning district to what's already in the county. In terms of public outreach, there is a abbreviated process from what a typical rezone would go for. We do provide a notice of application, notice of here's postcards, and we do notify all HOAs within a 1-mile radius, and we do all the advertisements that's required under statute. There is no requirement for a neighborhood meeting in these initial zoning cases. Again, the state and the city sees it more perfunctory. And to that regard, we haven't got any correspondence in support or opposition to the initial zoning case. Findings here, again, as I mentioned, the initial zoning, uses and densities that are no more intense than that permitted in the county. I've said that the most equivalent analogous translational zoning is this SR 43 district. We brought this to the commission on September 19th. There were 6 speakers present, 4 spoke in support. 1 had a question about it, and 1 commented about the general plan amendments that we had talked about. In the end, the commission voted 7-0 to recommend approval to the city council for the initial zoning. All right, I'm going to pivot now to the pre-annexation development agreement. So these all kind of fit together, believe me. So what this does is it provides a legal framework to facilitate the annexation development of state trust land. And as I mentioned, it's a requirement of state land as a condition of annexation and zoning. So as the fiduciary of the trust, this agreement helps the state land department manage lands to best serve the interest of the trust. So as the annexing and host jurisdiction, there's immense benefit here. As we've mentioned in past discussions, the city plays a key role in land planning for smart growth and economic development in the community. Again, you've heard from Jen Stein earlier about our role in economic development endeavors, not only with this land, but citywide as well. And we know with little remaining private land, vacant land in our community is very important. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a very close and our relationship with state land is intertwined into the future. So to meet the economic and community goals this council has laid out, it's imperative that we approach these areas with really a cohesive strategy that unifies these lands under our elevated processes and with uniform development standards. And these are principles that are found within our smart growth section of our general plan. So what I'm going to do is briefly highlight state land obligations under the pre-annexation agreement, and then I'll briefly summarize the city obligations under that agreement. So with the state land department, their obligations are to advance land planning and sale on properties. Again, the interest is to catalyze economic development and smart growth in this area, in the North Peoria Gateway. Also, embedded within this agreement is the prioritization of parcels C and D. And so what you're looking at on the right is kind of a preview of the land use map for the North Peoria Gateway. I know that the map's hard to see, but you can see parcels C and D on the upper part of the graphic there. These are along Vistancia Boulevard and what we call Westward Skies. They're immediately south of 5 North, Vistancia. And so we recognize that these areas are very important, and what we didn't want to see was residential growth cannibalize these areas too soon. We wanted to make sure that these areas were prioritized for non-residential development. We think there will be some added interest and influence from activities on the 5 North side. So what this provision in the agreement says is it restricts residential for 15 years unless there's employment-focused uses over 20 acres in size, permitted in 5 North parcels D15 through D18. So those are the immediately adjacent to this area. So if we realize non-residential development in that portion of Vistancia, then the residential restriction will continue in perpetuity. The other prioritization we want to talk about is what we call parcel Q, and so that is at the intersection of Happy Valley and Vistancia Boulevard. Again, this is a key parcel. It's got great visibility off of the Loop 303. It is served by several main arteries. It is the gateway into the Vistancia and several other established master plan communities. Again, we didn't want to see residential consume the land at too early before we've had a chance to market and realize non-residential development. So what this restriction says is there's a residential restriction for 10 years with the exception of what we call vertically integrated mixed use, which essentially is if you have residential above commercial, that's vertically integrated mixed use. You could have that at day one. or after 175,000 square feet of non-residential uses are constructed. So this gives us an ability to go after those types of mixed-use developments that we envision and contemplate in this area, and kind of puts a hold on residential development to give us a chance to really see that vision through. The other highlight too of this is it allows for westward skies, and I mentioned that westward skies is the roadway that would go from Vistancia Boulevard up to 5 North. Around, it would provide frontage for not only AMCOR, but also the American Leadership Academy, and it terminates at El Mirage Road. So it's an important roadway for traffic circulation in the area. So this allows for the Westward Skies construction from 5 North to Vistancia Boulevard, but it also provides a reimbursement mechanism. So as these lands are auctioned, the successor then would have the responsibility for reimbursing the city up to 70% of the design and construction cost, up to a $3 million value at the time of the land auctions. So those are the highlighted obligations from State Land Department. I'm now going to turn to the Peoria obligations. So the obligations that's built into the agreement is that we bring forward the annexation, initial zoning, and the entitlement, the PCD, together on one night. There is some risk that if, we were to annex the property and then never follow through on the PCD, there is some risk to the State Land Department. So there was the interest in having these all heard the same night tonight. We also agree to annex the southern portion, the southern 450 acres of county land, also to facilitate development of the North Peoria Gateway entitlement using the PCD zoning mechanism. We'll talk about that at the next presentation. We also committed to update our infrastructure improvement plan within our impact fee model within 6 months to include the annexation area. So that's part of it as well. And Jen alluded to the Happy Valley and Vistancia intersection realignment. We know that's a challenging intersection, but also built within this agreement is the city to fund and construct Happy Valley and Vistancia intersection realignment. We already have up to $14.5 million allocated to that project in our capital improvement plan. I'll talk about that a little more later, but that's an important project to make circulation really optimal in this area. Now, one proviso I do want to mention in this agreement is that there is a provision that if for some reason the council decides to annex and approve the agreement tonight, but not approve the PCD, there is a provision that requires us to bring back the general plan amendment, the annexation, and the entitlement back to council to revert it back to what it had in its previous form, basically as county land and as unzoned land. So as I would indicate, that comes with a lot of risk. The net result, as I mentioned, these lands are still going to go to auction someday. They're still going to develop, but there is the opportunity cost of lost revenue and also having land that develops under our elevated design standards. So Mayor and Council, as we mentioned, there are 3 items before you tonight. We are recommending approval of Resolution 2479 for the pre-annexation agreement. 26R is the annexation of the 450 acres on the south, and 27R is the initial zoning of that annexed land. So as City Manager Darwin mentioned, there are public hearings required for the annexation and the initial zoning. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Councilor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, great presentation. Thanks for laying it out that we understand that, this is the annexation and initial zoning and then the zoning here in a minute. My question, I'm a fan of annexation because we have a lot of county land in the Mesquite District and some county islands. Here's my question. In regards to providing public services to the new annexed land as proposed, would that water, wastewater, would that be Peoria or would that be EPCOR? Because I know EPCOR is in that area. So just a question, Chris.
Mayor, Councilmember Schaefer, so for the annexation area, we would provide all public safety and general governmental services. Water and wastewater specifically would continue to be provided by EPCOR. We would provide service for the areas that are north that are already in the city.
All right, thank you. So council, we will now individually consider each item of 25R, 26R, and 27R. On 25R, is there any further discussion regarding 25R? Seeing none. Council, do I have a motion to approve agenda item 25R? Do I have a second?
Second.
Please vote on 25R. And it passes 7-0. Thank you. So now on 26R, Council, do I have any further discussion? Sorry, I have to go through this process. Do I have any further discussion on 26R? Councilor? Councilor Finn, sorry.
Yep, thank you. Dunn or Finn?
Finn, I just
Finn?
want to make
Okay.
sure that
All
Councilor
right, good,
Catena
okay.
didn't answer.
Okay, thanks. It's really not a question, it's just a comment. And Chris, this is kind of just for the, I think for the public a little bit more. You mentioned that you've been working on this for years, and I was having a conversation with two fellow council members that have been here 2 years longer than I. And I remember this being direction, vision, when I was first on council. That's 10 years ago. God help me, 10 years ago. But, so when you say years, this has really been something that has been the vision and the thought process for up here. And I just wanted to reiterate that it has really, it's been going on for a long time. And now it just, to me, it feels like it's just been shot out of a cannon, you know, and a lot of it has to do with the fantastic work that Jen has done. It has, in my mind, just Mike Finn pontificating here, has to do with the market, with the semiconductor, you know, plant and everything going in there, and then the relationship with the state land. And that's just been amazing, that those three things happening together, again, it feels like after 10 years, it just shot out of a cannon. And it's great work. You guys have done phenomenal, very supportive of all of this. I just wanted to really reiterate that this is 10 years of your life, too, put into this thing as well, and I know Jen put a lot of time and effort into this as well. So thank you all for all that you've done, and I just want to make that statement.
Councilor, do we have, so I will now do I actually have to open a public hearing for this?
Yes,
For
this is the next
26,
item.
okay.
Yep.
So I'll now open the public hearing for 26R. Do I have any members of the public that wish to speak on 26R? One person, Ms. Lorene Bodorf.
Hi, my name's Lorene Bodorf, and I live on North 128th Drive in the Mesquite District. And I'm going to lump in 25, 26, 27, and 28R, and I really am excited about you guys approving all of those. I'm excited about that whole project. So, thank you.
Thank you. So I will now close the public hearing. Council, do I have a motion to approve agenda item 26R?
Move to approve?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Please vote. And it passes 7-0. Thank you very much. 27R. Council, do we have any further discussion on 27R? Councilor Schaefer? Oh, hold on. Let me see here. Councilor Schaefer?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So Chris, just for confirmation and more so for the general public, 27R is the zoning from the county RU or Rural 43 to our equivalent, which is suburban ranch of SR 43. Is that correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Shaver, that is correct.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Councilor Finn? Or is that from the last one? Okay, sir. We will now, well, let's see here. Keep track of this. It's a process. All right, we will now open the public hearing for 27R. Any members of the public wish to speak on 27R? Seeing no hands, we will now close the public hearing on 27R. Council, do I have a motion to approve agenda item 27R? Do I have a second?
Second?
Second and a third, it sounds like. Please vote. And it passes 7-0. Thank you. I will now recognize City Manager, Mr. Henry Darwin, to introduce item 28R.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, as Chris mentioned earlier in his presentation, we have one more item to consider on the North Peoria Gateway. And this is a discussion and possible action to concur with the Planning and Zoning Commission's unanimous recommendation approving the rezoning of the North Peoria Gateway. And so Chris is going to take us through that discussion. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Darwin, Mayor and City Council. Sorry for all the different layered items tonight. The last one was really the undercard. This is the main event right now on this item.
Just to go down a UFC road.
Right. So we're now going to transition, as the city manager mentioned, to a discussion about the overall entitlement of the full 1,620 acres. This is inclusive of the area that the council just voted to annex. Again, as I mentioned, there's been an immense amount of work done in consideration of this case. To their credit, the team has rolled up their sleeves and devoted countless hours to thoughtfully consider all the details. And there's been a lot of work put in over the last year and a half on this, and I'm very proud of the outcome here. So the applicant tonight, that's Carolyn Oberholzer from BFSO on behalf of the Arizona State Land Department. The request is to rezone the full area that we're calling the NPG, North Peoria Gateway, from SR 43 to the new Planned Community District, or PCD. So the PCD, as I mentioned, that's a tailored zoning category or a master plan, another word for it. This is really suited for land areas over 600 acres in size. So we have PCDs in Bastancia, Mystic, Saddleback Heights, those are PCDs. And the objective here is to bring this forward under a unified and cohesive set of design, land use, and regulatory standards. So the approach here, this is always more desirable than the alternative, right, which might be a disjointed, piecemeal approach where individual projects come in. And so nobody wants that outcome. Really, the more the master plan approach is the desired approach here. The PCD zoning is being done in what the state calls a zoning bank. So we'll talk, briefly about a zoning bank in a few slides out. But essentially, it provides for flexibility so that as the parcels are auctioned out over time, and it's going to be over time, it'll be over years and possibly decades, that parcels are auctioned off. It provides for lands to have the flexibility so that they're best positioned to respond to market demands at the time of auction. This is an approach, the zoning bank rather, that's been very effective and successful in other areas in the valley. I'll mention a few: North Phoenix, Scottsdale, Queen Creek. They've all had zoning bank structures as part of their development position. So as an introduction, we have a few slides about state land. There's often confusion about state land and their role. Specifically, these are lands that were granted by the U.S. government to Arizona at statehood. So the disposition and eventual sale of these lands is a means to provide revenue to 13 underlying beneficiaries. So the State Land Department, they manage 9.2 million acres statewide. And of the 13 beneficiaries, the largest one is common schools, or K through 12 schools. They are 88% of the total lands within that inventory. Now, the governance of these trust lands, they come from the Arizona Enabling Act, they come from the Arizona Constitution and state statute. The State Land Department, they specifically act as the fiduciary for the trust, and they manage lands to maximize benefit to that trust. They determine essentially when lands are ready for auction. So as we've talked, whether they work with the city or not, it's still their mission to bring lands to market when they've reached their pinnacle value. So if it's going to happen, whether it's in a city or not, so why not bring it into our umbrella, and why not take advantage of those opportunities? Some key considerations that play into the overall thinking and strategy. You'll see in the second bullet, and we've talked about this a number of times, but again, 75% of our vacant land is state trust land. Future growth is contingent upon the development and unlocking of state land. One of the things that we have heard in the public forum over the last 10 months is please don't take away our open space. And so one thing just to clarify, state land is not open space. It's not preserved land. It will be brought to market someday, and it will develop someday. However, none of the work that you will hear about today and will impact existing regulations that we already have in place in our code to protect sensitive areas, such as wash corridors, hillsides, cultural areas, natural areas. Those regulations will remain in place, and they will continue to be applicable to this zoning case. So all that will remain in place. But most importantly, this land is not preserved land. And for us, we see this as a mutual benefit, not only for common schools, but also because we are running out of land for development into the future. And we have residents, as you heard earlier, they are crying out for opportunities for new retail, for places to work. And we're a growing community. We need new residential opportunities as well. So from a city strategy perspective, our role is to remove barriers and bring forward appropriately zoned land that will advance community and economic development goals. I think the site we're all familiar with. Again, it's 1,620 acres. To the north is Vistancia, and most specifically 5 North is directly to the north. To the east, pockets of vacant land. There are some large lot residential along the southeastern portion of the land. To the south, the area that we just annexed is Dos Rios and some vacant land. And to the west is a collage of land uses. At the southwest corner is the West Wing Power Station. To the north, along Happy Valley, there is a multifamily development in the county, single-family residential with Coldwater Ranch and Trilogy Residential. In terms of the area context, we mentioned there are few remaining vestiges of freeway frontages in the city, and I believe all of it goes through state land. So it's very important that we work together on the disposition of these lands. This area happens to be about 2 miles from the Four Corners, or what we all know as Lake Pleasant Parkway and Happy Valley Road. This is a graphic that shows constraints on the property. The applicant has termed this the aptly known as the spaghetti map, and it really is. There's a lot of constraints on this property. So if you look at it, the areas in orange, starting from the south, there are some major power line corridors. There's a 900-foot power line corridor along the southern portion of it, which, you know, won't be developed save for perhaps parking or roadways across it. You also have a power line corridor that's crisscrossing the property from the south to the northeast. Waterways and topography. There's a natural washes, 2 of them that crisscross the property and feed into to a larger wash. And there's also the Beardsley Canal that bifurcates the property from the east to the west. Roadways, it's got some important roadways that come through here, not the least being the Loop 303, Vistancia, and the various contours and constraints. They create unique geometry. They really lend itself well to the land use transitions and defined parcels that work well with a development case. Overall, when you look at it, approximately 1/3 of the overall property is impacted by these constraints, and that's nearly 600 acres of the 1,620 acres. Just a few remarks about the zoning bank concept through the PCD. Now, it's similar. I mentioned flexibility. It's similar to the zoning structure that we have for some of the large master plan communities to the north, Vistancia, Lake Pleasant Heights, and Saddlebacks. But essentially, when the developers of those communities come in, they have several development options they can choose from to develop that specific property within those developments. And so it provides a range of zoning options. Also, it tailors standards that differ based on where that parcel is relative to what the adjacent context is. So again, with the state land purpose of the zoning bank, it provides for that flexibility. Again, lands are auctioned over a good amount of time, but allows for flexibility, and I'll earmark within parameters. And we did work with them to devise some very good parameters that protect our interests, but allows for those flexibility so that it allows them to unlock maximum value when those specific parcels are ready to be brought to market. The zoning bank concept also, again, the benefit for us is it allows us to provide those context-sensitive regulations, right? We can adjust the regulations based on where the parcel is, and we control the future development of it. Again, they develop within the protection of our elevated design and development standards. So the way this would work is a successful bidder on a parcel then would come in, they would submit a site plan or a preliminary plat based on the proposed use. They would then identify the development option that they want to utilize or exercise with that parcel, and then that provides a responsibility to provide what's called secondary planning functions or documents that include things from more in-depth traffic impact analysis, more in-depth drainage and trails plans and so forth for that village that parcel is within. So the first person within a village, they have a responsibility to provide that elevated or that next level planning work within that area. The graphic on the left, I mentioned a few minutes ago that we, of course, adopted a new land use designation over these strategic state land areas. But the precursor from that was what you see on the left, and that was the land use plan as it existed. And I bring this up to note that this land use plan was really built into the zoning land use plan that you see on the right. So if you're looking first to direct your attention to the left, the land use plan, areas in pink are employment, areas in red are mixed use and commercial, areas in yellow, multifamily, various densities of residential, and then it feathers out to the light yellow, which is really the lower densities of residential, the light pink being more neighborhood commercial opportunities. So one thing to note from looking at that graphic is that we've always contemplated or anticipated the intensity really being along the Loop 303 and along Estancia Boulevard, and really transitioning out or feathering out as you get closer to these established areas. If you look to the right, and I'll go through this land use plan in a minute, but it very clearly aligns with the land use plan as it existed back then. You can see the areas in the middle along Loop 303 and Lake Pleasant, that hash pattern, that is a mixed use, that can be commercial, it can be employment, it can be various forms of residential within parameters, right? But you can see we're still confining that intensity or that those types of land uses really to the interior part of that North Peoria Gateway. And then as you feather out, as you get closer, you're looking more, like with the light yellow, you're looking more at single-family residential, moderate density residential as you get in. The closest to Trilogy along 135th, you'll see that pink and yellow pattern there. Again, that's reflective of the potential for single-family residential or the potential for neighborhood commercial uses. And again, that aligns with the general plan that you saw to the graphic on the left. And then as you look east of Loop 303, those are more challenging parcels to develop. While they have some level of visibility along Loop 303, they are challenging from a access perspective. So those we expect to be later in the development life cycle of this project. But again, you can see that as you get closer to some of these established areas in the county, you're looking at residential opportunities. And if you look where the blue and yellow, that is a possibility for single-family residential or office and employment uses there. So again, that's how the transition works. It's quite reflective of the general plan land use map that we had in place that informed that. I'm going to go through just briefly some of the context protections that are built into it. I'll spend some time on, again, some of these boundary conditions. I think those are the more sensitive areas that we spend a lot of time trying to understand and address. So parcels adjacent to single-family residential development like Trilogy, like areas in the county, they're intended to be limited to land uses that are already contemplated. So if you look at parcel A, that would only be single-family residential. If you look at parcel P, that could be office or it could be residential there. Parcel FF, that is single-family residential. Again, as I mentioned, the intensity along the middle of this entitlement area. Talk a little bit about height, setbacks, and kind of that transition from, particularly from Trilogy at Estancia. So that middle parcel, you'll remember, that could be neighborhood commercial or residential. Let's talk about that one, those development options. If somebody wanted to come in and do commercial there, they would follow our intermediate commercial standards. Those standards allow for up to a 48-foot height limit for commercial, or if they're going to do residential, 30 feet. But let's talk about the kind of the gradation of height change as we progress from west to east. So El Mirage, that is an arterial, it's a very wide right-of-way, it's about 130 feet. When you consider the landscape buffer, the street frontage landscape buffer that's required on either side, you're required to have 15 feet on either side of El Mirage, so that's an additional 30 feet. And so as you look at it from the perspective of a residential home in Trilogy, you are approximately 160 feet from the start of that parcel. So really, for every foot of height that you gain, you have 3.3 feet of residential setback from that residential component. So so I'll move to the east a little bit. You'll see how the gradation changes a little bit. So effectively, as you go to the next level parcels, as you move into their project, if you do multifamily on what's known as parcel G in the middle, it does allow up to 60 feet. Or if you do single family, it allows 30 feet. But you already, at that point, you're already 900 feet away from El Mirage Road. And again, with 160 feet that it consumes El Mirage Road and those street frontage setbacks. So there's a good amount of separation before you get to that next level height there. So essentially, for every foot of height that you gain from the perspective of Trilogy, you're adding 17 feet of setback. And not to belabor it too much, but again, as you continue east, we see the parcels along the west side of Estancia as having some benefit for mixed-use development. These are parcels BF, L, and N. So if you did multifamily, or I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. If you do non-residential, there's a 56-foot height limitation. If you do attached multifamily, that could be 60 feet. Or we think there could be a possible good sites here for a medical use. Jen talked about medical uses earlier. If you do a medical use, that does allow you to go up to 72 feet there. Remember, though, that these parcels are constrained, particularly when you look at parcels L and N. These are the parcels that are the southern part of that graphic that's shaded. But essentially, you're at the nearest point at the upper part, you're already a quarter mile from Trilogy, in addition to the 160 feet of separation. So again, as you move to the east, we allow a little more intensity, a little more height. And then as you move further east of Estancia, again, these are areas that are designated for mixed use. There is a height allowance up to 90 feet. But at that point, from the nearest part of El Mirage, that's 1,700 feet. That's more than a quarter mile. At the lower portion, you're at 3,700 feet. That's 2/3 of a mile at that point. That just gets you to Estancia Boulevard. And then if you choose to develop east of Estancia Boulevard, we have a step back provision that says that if you want to realize the 90 foot of height, you have to step back the building at a 1-to-1 ratio even further. So there'll be even further separation before you get further to the east to realize that height requirement. And then parcel Q, I mentioned this a little bit. I won't belabor this, but I mentioned it in the pre-annexation discussion. Again, this is a very important parcel. We think it's very strategic. Not only does the agreement enumerate, but also the PCD talks about the residential restriction for this parcel, allowing for some period of time to realize non-residential growth there. We see options here for mixed use, for commercial, office, hospitality, employment, and perhaps residential as well, but a very, very strategic parcel there. I want to briefly talk about access and traffic. So what you're looking at is a schedule of improvements that the city has already put into motion, right? So Happy Valley and Estancia, we know that that's a very challenging intersection today. It carries a significant load. We've earmarked over $15 million. It's in our capital improvement program to fix and realign that intersection. So we are already underway on a design concept report to identify interim and final improvements. So interim improvements, they will include dual left turn lanes. So as you're driving north of Estancia, dual lefts going westbound on Happy Valley. If you're going eastbound on Happy Valley, dual lefts for northbound on Estancia. So these are interim improvements that would be designed and constructed over fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26. And then that design concept report informs the final improvements for the realignment at that intersection. So that would occur we've got $14.5 million earmarked in the capital plan, and that would occur over fiscal year 27 and fiscal year 28. And also, in addition to that, we are also coordinating with State Land, ADOT, MAG, McDOT, and other agencies for an El Mirage connection from the Loop 303 to Jomax, just to provide for enhanced and better circulation in this area. So right now, ADOT, they're the lead on a design concept report that's underway. We're a large part of that. We're a primary stakeholder. We've committed a lot of time and resources toward that effort. So ultimately, we have some money earmarked towards that, but ultimately the full construction of the link is contingent upon the passage of Prop 479 in that regard. Now, one of the key items that we are always evaluating is the impact to the city's water portfolio. It's very important that we protect and preserve our water portfolio. So as I mentioned earlier, the southern annexation area that will continue to be served by EPCOR. North of that line, that's the city's water service area. Why is that important is that we wanted to see what the general plan called for. So you can see on the screen there, 13,989 total units. That may very well seem like a striking number in terms of an overall cap, but that's what the That's what the most recent general plan showed. So we worked with the State Land Department on an exercise to understand the allocation of units for each of the land use categories, and from that exercise, that's what that yield is. And that's not all going to be within the city. Again, some of those units are going to be within the EPCOR area, and some of those units within the city of Peoria's area. But in working with the PCD, we wanted to make sure that we were not exceeding that current allocation. So in that regard, we've worked with the State Land Department to ensure that those unit maximums remain in place, and that we thoughtfully consider that we are in a desert and we want to protect our water portfolio. I do want to mention that this, again, is a maximum ceiling. If you just think back to the spaghetti exhibit that I showed you a few minutes ago, there's a lot of constraints. There's a lot of areas that might have a unit allocation associated with it, won't develop as residential. In fact, it's very unlikely that residential will come anywhere near that ceiling that you see here on the screen. But it is a maximum ceiling as far as the entitlement exists. As with all our rezones, there is a public outreach process. So we provide a notice at the outset, provide information about the project, and then a notice of hearing before it comes to Planning Commission and City Council. So we notified all property owners within a quarter-mile radius and all registered HOAs within 1 mile at those two intervals. Also provided postings within the newspaper, and the site was posted. The applicant held 2 neighborhood meetings. The first one was held in person at West Wing Community Center on May 15th. We had a really good turnout. We had 82 in attendance at that meeting. They followed that meeting up with a second meeting on August 8th via Zoom platform. It was a virtual meeting, and we had 29 in attendance at that meeting. The topics that were discussed, just to gain an understanding of how state land is different and what their mission is, there was concerns about traffic, about how will this impact home values, the water security, what are the proposed uses here, and what's the impact on school capacity. Overall, in your packet, and you have a citizen outreach program and all of the correspondence that we received throughout the process. We've received to date 10 emails that we'll categorize as inquiries. They had questions about the project that we got back to and answered those questions. We received 23 letters of opposition, and we received 2 letters and emails in support. We also received recently correspondence from the Peoria Unified School District. We've provided that to the council for your consideration. This area is within the PUSD planning area, or within their boundary area. Students will attend Vistancia, Lake Pleasant, or Zuni Hills Elementary Schools, depending on the location. They would also attend Liberty High School, their zone for Liberty High School. As far as that, we always offer the opportunity for the school district to participate in the review. We have shared the project details with the school district. We have met with them to talk about the project. In their letter, as you'll see, they do offer their full support for the entitlement. They cite the thoughtful planning and design of the North Peoria Gateway, but they also note the continued need and prioritization to identify new educational facilities in the community. In that regard, we have, we had coordinated a meeting with between State Land Department and PUSD to talk about opportunities into the future. So just thinking back on the letters in support and opposition, those in support generally cited that this is a cohesive development plan and maximizes the potential for the area. It provides economic development opportunities and reduces out-commuting of the workforce. Those in opposition, many letters received were identical, and they opposed altogether the general plan amendments, AMCOR, and this entitlement. Some of the letters talked about concerns of flexible zoning that would enable mixed use and employment uses here. There was concerns that were enumerated about traffic generation in the area, and there were also some letters that identified the loss of open space and wildlife habitats and the interest in keeping it zoned SR 43 into the future. The item, as you know, was brought to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a public hearing that was held on September 19th. 2024, we had 10 speakers present. 9 of those spoke in support, and we had 1 speak in opposition to an air park, which wasn't on the agenda, of course, that night, and we certainly clarified that, again, given all the constraints, there is no way that an air park would ever fit anywhere in this area. and certainly has never been part of the contemplation of this entitlement. After deliberation, the commission voted 7-0, recommending approval to the city council. So as I conclude, key findings, this zoning designation and the land uses, they conform to the special land use category, and they advance several key goals and policies in the general plan. The uses and development standards are based on the existing general plan designations that we had in place, and they're structured to provide really those, what we'll call context-sensitive design standards. This PCD facilitates smart growth and economic and community development opportunities in the future, and we've also received a Prop 207 waiver into the city, from the applicant. But as I close, I do want to reflect upon all the development that I've seen in my tenure. We've certainly had a lot of important and amazing projects that have occurred in the past, and we've developed into a very desirable community. But our coordination with State Land Department, and most recently in the last 18 months, I believe has ushered in a new era in the city, really a new legacy and a new chapter. And so this is a new frontier that will bring in new opportunities and really, I believe, move the city closer to our goals of fiscal sustainability, having opportunities for employment and commercial and residential all within the same community. And it moves us closer to that realization. So we're really proud of the work that we've completed, really proud of our partnership with State Land Department, and in that regard, we enthusiastically are recommending that the council adopt Ordinance 2417 as recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission, subject to conditions 1 through 8. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Councilor Schaefer.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, great presentation, a lot of detail, very complex. I have one question and one comment. You talked about 13,900 homes or units.
Yes.
Do you have a breakdown of single family to multifamily, like a projection, like a 60-40 or anything like that?
Mayor, Councilmember Schaefer, I don't have a breakdown to show you. So the portion that is allocated to Peoria, I think is roughly around 10,000. So again, if you reflect upon the PCD, some areas are exclusively single family, some areas moderate density residential, which could be single family or could be some attached multifamily examples, and other areas could be multifamily. So it's really hard to estimate what that breakout would be, but it's essentially about 10,000 units in the city portion.
Thanks, Chris. I was told you had a crystal ball on your desk. I must be mistaken. No, and the reason I brought that up, I just have a little bit of concern because just north of the 5 North area, I think we have, 2,500, 3,000 multifamilies already entitled, is that correct?
I think the entitlement for 5 North is 2,500, right?
2,500, okay, thanks, Chris. Now, I'm really excited for all the opportunity that is available to us with like the retail that you talked about, the restaurants and the entertainment and potentially healthcare and everything, and that North Peoria Gateway could bring. I'm excited about that, and I applaud all the hard work because I can tell this is very detailed and I know some hours went into it. Especially I want to applaud those that protected the, I think, parcel A adjacent to Trilogy for making sure it was single family, because I know that, Trilogy has a lot of concerns about encroachment and development. So thank you for protecting parcel A next to Trilogy. There are obviously some concerns in my district around industrial and manufacturing and multifamily housing. And so in listening to the people with those concerns, like I said, I'm excited for the opportunity that the North Peoria Gateway is going to bring to the area. However, though, given the current rezone as it's proposed, that does allow an opportunity for industrial manufacturing and multifamily as the concerns of my citizens, I can't support it. So, okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mayor.
Of course. Anyone else? Okay. I will now open the public hearing for 28R. Do we have any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Seeing no hands, I will now close the public hearing. I think you guys just put like me hitting the gavel, I think, in this process. Council, do I have a motion to approve 28R?
Move to approve.
Do I have a second? Second. I have a second and a third. Please vote. And it passes 6-1. Thank you.